Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Finance June 2023 meeting. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we get started, I had a request from Ms. Schofield for a point of personal privilege, which I am recommending we grant, and without objection, I will turn it over to Linda.
Thank you.
Yeah, I might object too.
But you may proceed.
So I'm going to start crying before I even say it. Yeah. After 10 years on this board, I am stepping down. I have given my notice to the town clerk. What is wrong with me? I serve with a great bunch of people of both parties and great staff, and it has been an education and a privilege and sometimes a challenge. But for personal reasons and family reasons, I need to take time away. So I'm going to step off. I gave my notice effective September 1st. The town committee does have the option, if they want to appoint me they have to appoint somebody to fill in from September until the new person is elected. If need be, I will fill in those 3 months, but I needed to wrap it up, as they say. So, thank you.
Yeah, it's going to be a very different world without you, Linda.
I think some people will be thrilled.
Well, I'm not one of them. I just want to say that you've served the state and the town of Simsbury with skill. You've gained respect. You've contributed terrifically to this community, and we're indebted to you for all those years of service.
Thank you. Thank you.
I share those sentiments.
And I'll just say I've had the privilege of knowing Linda both as a selectman, as a deputy first selectman, as the first selectman, and now as chair of this committee. And I can't think of anyone who has guided me who works harder. Linda will go and investigate and research and make sure that this board has the information it needs to make an informed decision, and our community is benefited because of the effort you put in, not only in this job, but as our state representative. I know.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really been a pleasure serving with you guys. It's a great group. So, okay, enough of that.
So we're in transitions. So as we say fond farewells, not quite, we offer warm welcomes. We have with us the interim town manager, Lee Erdman. We're very happy to have you here with us, and we hope you'll come to many more meetings in the future. I know we all look forward to working with you, and I wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you very much. It is my great pleasure, really, to have the opportunity to serve my new hometown. I've lived here in Simsbury since 2018, but mostly on a part-time basis, so I'm learning a lot about the town that I did not know, and I'm particularly impressed with the quality of the staff that I've had an opportunity to work with so far, especially our esteemed finance director, number one, top notch. We're going to have fun working together and continuing to improve our financial presentations to the board.
Wonderful. So on that note, I just want to...
Can I just interrupt and say, I'm really glad to know that you have lived here as a citizen and have the perspective of a citizen, and understand how difficult it is and you being a former town manager would be more tuned in than most. But nevertheless, it always shocked me after I was state representative and left that, how quickly I was completely out of tune with what was going on in the legislature. So it's good that you have that perspective too for this town, because I think it's a real problem for our citizens that a lot of them just don't really have the time or the access to understand what's going on, and they rely on people like this to bring that. So I know you'll bring that perspective too.
Thank you again.
Any other members? Bert or Mike?
Welcome. Your pre-announced news of you was very, very positive. It's a pleasure to meet you in person. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
I'm just going to repeat what everyone else says. Ditto. Ditto, sir.
I think Lee did mention to me he's never worked with a Board of Finance before, so we'll work together collaboratively and try and figure out the roles and the balance of checks and balance. Challenge and opportunity. I wanted to first acknowledge Amy for her work. As you know, we instituted just recently monthly financial reports, and I think each time we get them, they're better and better. The fiscal notes are very, very helpful. Of course, Amy is used to this. We have questions, and we'll get to those, but I did want to thank you for your efforts and putting that forward and to let you know how grateful we are. I also wanted to mention that I had an opportunity to meet with Lee and Amy about a week ago, and Lee shared some information with me that I think our board will find exciting to the extent it's exciting for Board of Finance members. It may not be as exciting for the public.
We have a low threshold for excitement.
But from our perspective, it was through the roof excitement when he told me he was going to focus, his priorities were to focus on a more comprehensive budget message, earlier capital budgeting and use of benchmarks and performance indicators. We think, very much in line with GFOA best practices. He brings with his experience as a financial analyst that I think is a great process improvement. I did ask Amy today whether she paid Lee to say that to me. And she told me she did not.
I did not. On his own.
So I didn't know if you wanted to speak to that at all, about what you're thinking, or we can get into it later.
Thank you very much. I would just say very briefly, I know you have a long agenda and lots of things to discuss. But I began my career in Durham, North Carolina as a budget analyst. And I remain a budget analyst at heart. I was budget director in Hartford, town manager in Wethersfield, city manager in Hartford, and chief administrative and financial officer in Springfield, Mass. And,
Awesome.
I love the opportunity that the budget-making process presents to tell the community's story to you as elected leaders, both on the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance, and as importantly, to the citizens. So in that regard, I've taken great pride over the years to provide as much information as I possibly can to help you all make the decisions you have to make. So this includes a very detailed budget message. I used to write my own budget message in Wethersfield, 20 pages long.
Great.
Told the story of everything that anybody ever wanted to know. They didn't even have to look at the detail. It was all right there in the budget message. So I'm a big believer in goals and objectives, how we measure success, moving beyond activity counts and outputs to outcomes. What are we trying to accomplish as a community? And I was pleasantly surprised to find in reviewing the proposed budget that Maria put together. I had not seen it before our meeting, but there's a good foundation there. And we have a long way to go, but I think we can get there. And I probably won't be here for the budget preparation process.
You can run for office.
Town manager selection
Vacancy.
process goes as smoothly as we hope it will. But I hope to lay the groundwork in terms of the finance team will be ready to make a presentation to the new town manager, male or female, in terms of what they'd like to see in the 24-25 budget. And hopefully that new manager will embrace the direction that we all, along with you, would like to go in.
Mm-hmm. Great.
So thank you.
And the other thing Lee said that I think people will be very pleased with is his approach in terms of information is to release information as he gets it, not to withhold it. So we really appreciate that commitment to transparency and resource sharing, because I think when we all have the information, obviously, we make better decisions for our citizens. So thank you for that commitment. It means a lot to this board. We're very grateful. So with that, Amy, why don't you walk us through the beginnings of the finance report, and then we'll open it up to questions. Before we do, I just wanted to highlight to the board, we've had discussions in the past about transfers, and that's been a point of some confusion at various points. But I did talk with Amy today, and our plan is over the summer to sort of rework and re-edit to clarify our transfer policy to make sure everyone's on the same page, and that's especially important as we have the new interim and then the new town manager. Make sure that's crystal clear to everyone, looking at both charter and state law, and I'm hoping that Bert will work on that, as it does involve some charter and state law coordination with me and Amy, so if you're willing, and of course the full board and anyone else who wants to.
I'm willing.
I knew you were. I have one on Bert. All right, and so with that, Amy, why don't you start with the big picture? What are year-end projections on expenditures and revenues looking like? And then we'll get into the substance and then open it up to questions.
Okay, so start with the financial summary. So on the revenues, so as you know, the projections that I do quarterly are very detailed. I go line item by line item. For these, they are not as detailed. It's what information comes to me. It's what I'm seeing. It's a quick review on where we ended up in the third quarter, and any trends that I'm seeing in the months following. So for the projections for revenue on the general fund, we are still well over budget by at least $1 million. So I'm still estimating the 1.2 million to 1.3 million in excess of budget on the revenue side.
Are you on a particular page?
I'm just speaking to my notes, so no.
Yeah, bottom line is page
Just
6.
the bottom line.
But the bottom line is not the projections on the monthly. That's just where we are at a point of time, the projections, right?
Right, the projections are just my notes. This is the actuals as of the end of May. And then on the expenditure side.
Before you go to if I could ask a question. I didn't have time to do as much as I would have liked in advance. I just had a lot going on personally. The finance department line, great news. I mean, we talked about this during the last budget, that we knew interest income was going up, and I'm embarrassed to admit I don't remember how much we bumped it up by for the next year's budget.
It was 800,000.
Oh, so even with this, that would still be, we'd still expect $400,000 more if interest rates stay the same. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And then big picture on the expenditure side for projections, just at a quick look, still around that 1 million mark, so probably anywhere from 900,000 to $1 million in excess of budget as of year end. So pretty consistent, pretty close with where I had projected at the end of March.
What is driving the expenditure savings?
We had several vacancies in the police department. We had some savings in our pension ARC payment. We had, let me just look offhand.
Wait a minute, how do we not, remind me, the ARC payment, isn't that pretty stable throughout the year? How did we have savings that we didn't expect?
Because they give us our actual contribution after the fiscal year
After the
starts.
budget. Okay, so I wonder if we could fix that.
Amy, is there any way we could fix that and ask them to get us that
little bit
number earlier?
So that's the problem, they do get it to us earlier. So by the time the actual calculation is done, there's a difference between what we budgeted and what the actual is. Typically it is right on. This is the first year we've ever seen a savings and a significant savings. Typically their estimates are right on, but also during the estimates, I don't think that involved the pension experience study.
Oh, right.
Oh,
Okay.
that's where, okay.
Right.
Or if they did, it wasn't finalized to have the actual detailed dollar value impact.
Good thing we did that, Lisa.
Yes, that was a good call, Lisa. So the majority of savings is salary savings, the highway department, the police department. There's nothing else I can think of off of hand. And then the pension savings were probably the biggest areas of savings.
That's even with a vacancy rate reduction of 200?
Right.
Okay, so that's something we can evaluate in the budget process, how we're budgeting vacancies. All right, are there other, what, you want to go back to the beginning of your report now, walk us through?
Okay, so under the fiscal year 23 approved supplemental appropriations, nothing has been added since the last time I reported out, so I'll skip over that section. It's just your running total for each meeting. Under the grants and donations, Linda, I was very upset you weren't here last time. This was done just for you. There's one correction that was made to the Communities Challenge Grant for the Performing Arts Center. I received some information from the project manager that it was approved, and then we didn't think it was approved, so I went back to him and he did confuse it with another grant. It was not approved. So I made that update. I know you did. I just didn't want to say the bad news. So I updated that information on your chart. The fiscal year 24 state funding. So the state of Connecticut, as you know, finalized their budget. And this is just a little summary chart on how it compares to what we budgeted for fiscal year 24. Basically in line with the majority of the grants. Two outliers. One was the LoSiP grant. We budgeted $156,000 and receiving about $244,000. So an increase over budget of $88,000.
Amy, why is that? This has been the same number for 15 years.
I do not know. But yeah, it has been.
That's interesting. I wonder what drove that. Okay.
And then the pilot, we had a slight bump in our pilot funding from $99,000 to $107,000. Moving on to the approved abatement, the Board of Selectmen approved an abatement at their June meeting for the EBAD property that's located at 100 Gristmill Road. They had purchased the property for $2.4 million, and they're doing some major renovations, which is expected to increase the value to about $5.3 million. The abatement is only for the new growth that's associated with the major renovation project. It's over a 10-year period, consistent with the prior abatement that was approved for EBAD. And then the estimated value of the abatement over the 10 years is about $548,000. And then they're also anticipating a personal property, which is not abated, over the 10 years, generating $91,390.
They are anticipating, they is the company?
Open it up to comments.
So I'll make some comments for historical perspective. Amy will know all of this already. There was an abatement for EBAD a few years back, and it was controversial that this board was opposed to it. And so I have to admit I was kind of shocked to see this. We had a lot of discussion about the ineffectiveness of abatements in many instances, particularly for a company that's not at risk of leaving, not at risk of building elsewhere. So I'd like to know more about what was the purpose of this. I mean, what was there an incentive? Is there a clawback if they don't meet I loved hearing you talk about performance metrics. I mean, usually, because this didn't happen with the last one either, it was just a gift. And so is there a performance metric here? Is there something expected that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise that merits giving away over $500,000 to a company that's a multi-billion-dollar company?
Can I just add, and why was it done in the first place? Into that?
Yeah, I was not involved in the process.
I know that. I'm just giving you history.
I don't believe there's any clawback or performance tied to the abatement. I think there is a projection of additional jobs and, of course, a projection of additional tax revenue over time.
Which would have happened anyway.
Would have happened anyway. Yeah.
And not to be a jerk about it, but jobs create income tax, which is good for the state, doesn't create property tax. So I would hope, and I'm leaving so I get to say these things, I would hope going forward that there'd be a meeting of the minds and maybe some policy around the criteria for when is an abatement merited, and what are the performance objectives, and how do you audit them? I mean, I don't, have we audited the last abatement at all? Did they meet what it was that, so there was some audit of that? Okay, well, that's good to hear. But same kinds of problems. Did you want to add anything?
The only other thing I can say is that the Business Development Committee did review this and did recommend it to the Board of Selectmen. And one improvement we will commit to make to all of you is that when these come through, we will make sure they get to you so you have the opportunity to review it, and if you wish, make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen. We did not do that this time. Our apologies for that.
We don't hold you accountable since you weren't here. But I would say, I mean, especially on the heels of the fact that we just had a very tough budget year, and it was, the Board of Selectmen had a real struggle with coming up with any cuts. They've just cut their budget next year by $72,000. And we know that next year is going to be a tough year. So,
one of the things I mentioned to your chair is that I love the concept of giving policy bodies options and alternatives, particularly on big policy matters, and the budget doesn't get bigger than that. So as you go through this process this next year, I look forward at least early in the process, to alert both boards early on about how things are shaping up, and give you some options and alternatives to think about even before the budget is presented.
I think that's brilliant.
Music to our ears.
Yes. And Amy paid you to say that, right? It is actually lovely. You're saying the right words to this board, so we are grateful.
If I have something to say, it's not to town management, but we did go through a process before the budget process last year with a string of supplemental appropriations.
Yes.
And we were concerned about that, and more concerned when it turned out that the budget outlook was so bad that we were weighing in on matters without really appreciating their true cost. Yeah. And here, I don't know how long this abatement was in the process of being finalized, but it couldn't have happened in 2 weeks. And it was within 2 weeks of our passing the budget, we discover someone's knocked $72,000 out of next year's budget. And the true cost of that abatement can't be measured until months from now. That just is bad policy.
Yeah, I think, it certainly might have changed some votes on this board had we have known that there was going to be a forbearance of revenue coming up in the following year. But one of the things the policy itself says, they have a section on transparency. A portion of the town website shall be dedicated to tax abatement information, which will include awards and abatement documents. And I was not able to find that. That may be on the board, but I couldn't find that. Is that something we could look into? Just so members of the public can find it. It's a GFOA recommendation.
You could not find the posting.
I could not.
Right,
It's in the minutes,
yeah.
but there's no dedicated spot, and it is part of the policy. I don't know. It's really a management follow-up, but recommended because it helps with transparency. Things like that. I did, I mentioned I think I sent to Amy, although I forgot everything I sent you, but I did actually send in some personal comments to the POCD recommendation about perhaps changing the incentive language to make sure that it's not continue to use incentives, but use incentives that are actually incentivized, that but for the incentive, the company would not invest or move to Simsbury. Because otherwise, to Linda's point, it's just a gift. Or talking with Amy, if you just want to give gifts to any business that invests, make it like we do with senior abatements, that anyone who applies gets it, and offer 10% off each year. But the problem we're seeing, and we saw this just at your last Board of Selectmen meeting, people come in and they're like, wait a minute, why did they get this abatement? Why didn't I? My taxes went up. And you have seniors who are supporting this business, and as I understand it, they entered into their lease contract in January, so it wasn't an incentive to move or stay or invest here. They'd already made that decision. So I think that's a good long-term thing to evaluate. And it goes into our long-term planning to understand what's coming and what's not in the grand list. But
And not pick winners and losers, as you're saying.
right.
Because there are other small businesses that are struggling and they're not getting tax abatements. So
Yeah, and a lot of the interesting research from the Lincoln Institute, which is sort of the expert on land use matters, they point out that really only about 20% are actually incentivized. 80% of businesses would have come anyway. So it feels good to do it in the moment, and I understand that. But
Yeah,
if
but
you're
it's-
actually trying to incentivize, the better courses are, well, keep the mill rate low. I mean, what this tells me is that the Board of Selectmen thought the mill rate was too high because somebody needed an abatement. So that tells me if we lowered the mill rate for everyone, that's better for everyone. And can we incentivize by investing in our assets and our public safety and our schools? Is that a better investment in our regulatory ease? There may be better incentives. I don't know. But it's worth thinking about. Okay. Anything else on the report?
Amy, guess what I'm going to ask you?
You know.
The assessor's audit?
Yes.
So, you all appropriated the money for the fiscal year 24 budget. Francine has a draft of the RFP. She has reached out to her counterparts in other towns to see if they've done anything similar, to get some feedback for inclusion into the RFP. And we prepared to issue it in July, might be by the beginning of August.
Glad to see progress. I'll give Francine a call because there is an association, and I'm sure she's familiar with it, of.
Well, so when she had originally reached out to her colleagues, they hadn't really heard of anything, and so I actually told her she should reach back out to you because you had
Yeah, because I
talked about.
spoke to other states and, yeah.
And so her initial colleagues weren't aware of anything, but I don't know if when she reached out to her organization as a whole, if they were able
Yeah.
to help.
There were a couple of names of organizations that, would be qualified to bid on it. One of which is the National Association of Town Assessors or something like that. I forget exactly what they are, but they have a consulting arm.
Yeah,
And they do this sort of thing all the time.
Yeah, if you have that information, I
Yeah.
can forward it along so that we can send them the RFP when it's ready.
Before we move on, Amy, just a quick update on the Board of Ed year-end projections. Are they still projected to come in bottom line on budget?
So yes, I had, saw your notes on the fact that they were only about 80-something% spent. The reason for that is because their balloon payments haven't been done yet. So,
I'm sorry, what?
I'm gonna explain. So they have balloon payments where they get paid out for their summer. It's the last pay period of June. And once that payout is made, which is a very large payment, for all of the teachers, then you'll see that percentage increase substantially. So that's why it looks like they'd be coming in under budget in this report.
So under budget now, potentially over budget, town managers 97, finance 99, and assessor 9941. What's happening there?
So that was the part of the CSEA contract negotiations, where there could have been changes in the department or things haven't caught up yet. So they're at the 99%, 97%. So those, like the town clerk department, the tax department, and I think that was it. We'll see the increases with the CSEA settlements.
The town manager doesn't have CSEA, right?
Yeah, that one I have to look into. I'm sure it has to do with the maneuvering of the transition, but
Okay.
I'll take a look.
But the assessor and finance do have CSEA, and that's
do.
related to that. Okay.
So I'm not sure I heard the final answer to the question about the Board of Ed. You're projecting that they will bring the year in at the budget?
Yes.
Good.
I mean, year's not over, but knock on wood.
Less than 2 weeks away. Oh, no, October, sorry. What am I thinking?
No, it is 2 weeks.
Oh,
It ends.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's 2 weeks,
It's
yeah.
a balloon.
State.
Yes.
So
Yes.
back in my state job, it's,
And community services had about 81,000 that hadn't been spent. What's that?
So this relates to the ARPA-themed nonprofit grant program that was approved for 150,000, 250, something along those lines. So those grant reimbursement requests, not all of them have been paid out. So we're waiting on the reporting from some of the nonprofit organizations. So we're hoping, Melissa's been reaching out to get that cleaned up for year end. So hopefully they can all get their payments.
So those are committed dollars that have been spent, they just haven't sought reimbursement, or we don't know if
Right.
they've been spent. Okay.
Right.
And debt service at 59.45%.
That will be within budget by the end of June. I actually just made those last two payments, on June 15th.
Okay, great. I did let Amy know that there's a chance I won't be here when they go out to bond, so you may get a phone call to sit in that meeting. And moving on to, are we ready to move on to long-term planning?
We're ready to move on.
Okay. Do I have that right? Am I going on the right agenda?
right.
Financial planning, okay. As background for the public, during the budget process, our community collectively evaluates what we're legally mandated to pay for, what are we getting and what will it cost us, and are we getting good value for what we're paying. And ultimately, at referendum, the voters decide those questions by whether they support the budget or they don't. By town charter, again, for members of the public, the Board of Finance is the budget-making authority for Simsbury, and in that capacity, the final decision maker in which budgets and property tax is reasonable to put before the voters at referendum. The Board of Finance makes the final decision after reviewing, and we're excited to have Lee here, data, benchmarks, best practices for the long-term fiscal health of the town, needs, wants, Simsbury's economic competitiveness with other towns, citizen affordability measures, inflation, after receiving a comprehensive review and feedback from and in collaboration with the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Education, management, other boards, and the public. Over the past 5 years, robust grand list growth has enabled Simsbury to keep tax increases zero or relatively low, despite large expenditure increases until last year. We anticipate expenditure costs to continue to increase, but are projecting grand list growth to be less robust and likely insufficient to cover expenditure increases, necessitating some tax increase or a reduction in services. I want to publicly thank Amy and Lee for initiating this planning discussion with the hope that we can, at the end of this process, reach some sort of consensus on methodologies, standards with which to evaluate needs, wants, and affordability standards for the town. I do want to share some really exciting news. Amy and Lee have confirmed that they are working on a one-page mill rate calculator, which will enable us to plug in numbers and manipulate the mill rate and see what if we make certain changes, what the results will be and how that will impact the taxpayer. So I think that will be not only helpful to this board, but a great communication tool for the public. As we know, and the public may not be aware, Amy's done a phenomenal job on developing a long-term financial planning model, and it is really wonderful. But it requires, it's not that easy.
A lot of tabs.
Right, it's a lot of work because there's a lot of data in it, and that's what makes it such an effective tool. But now we can focus on, well, how do we make it a little bit more visible to the public and the policy board? So I'm really excited to have that. Amy distributed a memo that I put together, and Mike will have to email that to you and Derek, because I didn't get it done until about 10 minutes before I left the house. But in it's a document that sort of outlines where we've been, some of the things members have raised, and some GFOA best practices that we consider as we consider the questions that Amy and Lee have posed to our board. And it's also just generally the timeline of what we follow in the budget process. One thing I think in talking with Mike that's clear is Mike said, well, we think about these things all the time. We do a lot of research, but we're not, I think there's an opportunity to communicate what we've been doing to the public in a more, visible and readable form, so that people can see what we're doing. Because, it may come as a surprise to Lee and Amy, but not that many people watch this.
And that's why I said, Lee, earlier, that I'm glad that you come from this from the perspective of a regular citizen here in town, because you know how hard it is to even be aware of this stuff. And I know we're following the law when we put out the statement for people to vote on, do you vote for, X number of millions of dollars? There's no context. People have no idea what they're voting for. Well, is that more than last year or less? Yeah. What's it going to do to my taxes? There's none of that when they're in the voting booth. So communications really could be improved.
One tool I've used in the past that is helpful in getting out to more people is putting out a budget in brief.
Yeah.
So maybe over the course of the summer and the fall, we can think about how can we come up with, probably not a one-pager, but a much smaller document than the proposed budget and the budget that's ultimately recommended to the citizens, that maybe we put out there online, that gives them kind of a snapshot, the highlights of the budget. What are the major drivers? Why are we recommending what we're recommending? That sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. I think that would be great. Love it. You will have our full support on that. I think that's a great addition. And to Linda's point, I think it's really necessary. It's very hard to do that. And it was particularly hard this year with the reval, explaining the concept. That was a very difficult thing to do, and with limited reporting in the press, so it was hard to do. I did want to recognize Paul Hinault, I've been consulting with, and sort of it includes a framework and timeline of which when we can evaluate different aspects of the budget, given the lack of information we have at certain points of time by the nature of state law and other things that are out of everyone's control. But there are things we can do at different points along the path and come up with initial guidance, new guidance, or I shouldn't say guidance, initial evaluation, secondary evaluation, then final guidance. Once we have all the information, sort of a tiered step. And I definitely welcome Amy and Lee, although Amy is pretty familiar with the process, although we don't always articulate it. Well, Amy is a master at taking sometimes our complicated thoughts and saying, okay, is this what you mean? And boom, boom, boom. I think in any event, there was a strong sentiment from this board that we find a way to articulate it to the other policy boards, because they would say, well, you didn't really give us guidance, and we're thinking we gave you exact guidance. So there's a little I'm on Venus and you're on Mars situation. Anything we can do to make that a little better, we'll work towards that.
Madam Chair, if I may say one more thing. I've had the opportunity to interact now with the shared budget director, Melissa Appleby, another wonderful staff member. And the town of Simsbury is really fortunate to have a dedicated budget director. Many towns this size do not have that level of expertise to support the finance director and the manager and ultimately the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance. But I kidded her this morning. I said, have you figured out the 24-25 budget yet? She said, I'm working on it. So I said, start big. Let's look at the big picture, right? Get an idea of what the big picture is. What are the major drivers? And then we work down to the detail to as best we can, come within whatever guidance you and the Board of Selectmen agree is appropriate for the next year. You know, you fully understand, I'm sure, that it is just guidance, you know, and things change over the course of the year, but I guess as a suggestion to the Board of Finance as well, start with the big picture, and then we can work down through the details and look at options and alternatives.
We are very welcome to do that, and I think it makes great sense to do that before the budget instead of doing it all within a week.
Exactly.
So we are, I mean, yes, I think, again, Amy paid you to say that, so Amy, we're gonna have to take you out to lunch because you spent a lot of money on Lee. These are the, yeah, I mean, you're saying things that our board has been advocating really for the last 5 years, so we're very grateful
Good.
that these are your priorities, very happy.
Yeah, and I think I heard that you're also interested in not necessarily assuming that all fixed costs are fixed.
Right.
And you know,
Right.
going back to looking at, well, wait a minute, what does everything that's in there have to stay there?
Right, yeah,
Which-
zero-based budget.
Yeah, I mean, the majority for sure, but
Yeah.
there's little bits here and there that, you know, it just gloms on, and we tend to just hear about, well, this is what we're newly proposing, but well, wait a minute, do we still need that? Can't we get rid of that?
Yeah, no, the budget-making process is a great opportunity to ask repeatedly why.
Right.
Yeah, I'm speechless. This is great. This is, yeah. I'm done. Let's call it a night. I mean, no. But really, you're embracing all the values and the priorities that this board has
Yeah.
expressed, so we're very pleased to hear that. And also, really, Amy, pleased that you didn't have to pay Lee to say that, so it's, thank you for that.
I'll say one more thing if I may.
Of course.
Just for food of thought. I was not very successful at this in my career, but I would kid my policy leaders. Now, if you give me some guidance and I come within that guidance, you're not gonna make any changes to what I propose, right?
No. So, I mean, part of our charge as a policy board is, well, our level of scrutiny will be much lower if you do that.
Oh, good.
But we do have an obligation by statute
Yes,
and
understood.
to
Yeah,
ask
I'm just
questions.
teasing you all.
But I think our record in the past is, I mean, if we've given guidance and they were within that, it's not like we then said, oh, well, let's take a little more.
Oh,
No.
good. Oh, good.
But we do give tough guidance, as Amy knows.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, no, we respect your role in setting the priorities for the town and Matt's role in setting the priorities for the Board of Ed. And our role is really to look at the big picture and are we being most efficient and are there alternate ways to pay? And if you look at the document, which I realize is long, but Amy's used to that, you can see some of the criteria we used in the last
Right,
budget
right.
process. But it's consistent, like, again, with exactly what you were saying, so. All right, so,
Do you want to talk about this?
so I am lost. We are on the financial planning discussion. We're
Yep.
still on that. Okay. So we'll start. Amy, why don't you give us sort of a brief overview on what you were thinking when you proposed those questions, and just for members of the public, your view of what you see the structure of the discussion in July and what you hope to accomplish and where you think there are opportunities.
Sure. So when we had met last week, you, myself, and Lee, you had expressed looking at the operating budget first. So that kind of got me to brainstorming of like doing it in maybe a sectioned approach as opposed to, the workshop idea that was initially put out there. So I guess my thought process, kind of pivoting towards that approach, is having some feedback from the board, like what are your priorities, what do you want to see, do you want to look at program changes, are you supportive of adding staff, is there something that you want to support with the grand list growth and kind of update our current model and build it around the guidance that you all give. Come back in July with a draft of that model, make tweaks, and then we can update the out years of the 4 years based on the approved model. And then after we go through the operating budget, start with our debt and our capital. And another thing I did not pay Lee to say is starting capital earlier. So hoping that after we are done our operating, it'll transition nicely into our capital work and then the actual start of the budget within the capital. Melissa and I are working on a timeline together as a proposal as to when we can start this, when we think it would be the best time to start working with the department heads, update the timeline, and then move it through the boards. So that's my high level vision.
Lee, did you pay Amy to say that? Yeah, as Linda said, this has been a priority for the Board of Finance for many, many years. So very pleased that this initiative is coming forward. I think it makes perfect sense. Once you understand the capital, it's capital for the members of the public. Debt service is a legal obligation. It must be paid first before anything else in the budget. We are legally obligated to pay it, so we need to understand the ramifications of that, not only this year, but in the next year. And then, as Lee said, the operating costs that are associated oftentimes with capital. And so Amy's point, the question is, often, do you want to spend this for personnel or capital? And it all sort of depends on the whole entire picture. What is that going to do to taxes? And looking at one leg of the stool individually without understanding how they all are holding the stool up leads to Bert's point, sometimes decision-making that is not well informed. So trying to understand how everything fits in the big picture makes sense, because if you tell me one thing, do I want it? Yes. If you tell me one thing else, do I want it? Yes. But when I look at it all together and I see how much it costs, I'm putting this back, I'm putting that back, right? So it's just like a family budget. But so I really applaud Amy for this. Feedback, Amy, what would be helpful to you tonight in terms of feedback? What would you look for us from tonight?
Maybe, I don't know if it's necessarily tonight. I don't know if it's fair that you guys haven't really had a chance to kind of talk about it, but, are you committed to things like funding fixed costs? Or do we want to look at program cuts? Is there something that you want to, we have, as you know, a number of positions coming up. The police study recommended additional positions. We have our ARPA-themed funding that the social worker would not be under in the fiscal year 25 budget, so that position would be new. Is the board committed to funding new positions? Do we just want to see how the base budget looks with just base assumptions based on the approved contracts that we have? I don't know, just anything that you can give me to start the model, and then we can work through more of the specifics as I have a draft for you.
Well, speaking personally, I would say, and by the way, anyone can pay me to say anything. Since we seem to be leaving some money on the table. But, I really took to heart the projections that you left us with in the last few budget meetings about next year's budget and the magnitude of the tax increases we might be seeing over the next 3 years. And based on that, I would like to closely review our assumptions about fixed costs and not assume that any of them is necessary until we put it into the larger perspective. So I was hoping, with respect to both policy boards, that we could have that conversation about not simply moving along on the same trajectory we've been following for the last several years.
Lee, for members of the public, you had mentioned zero-based budgeting, which I think is in alignment with what Bert just said. Can you just explain to the public what that is?
Zero-based budgeting is a pretty straightforward concept. It was actually first used by Jimmy Carter when he was governor of Georgia. And the concept is, you don't take anything for granted. You go back to zero. You can do this on both the expenditure side and the revenue side. And it can be a lot of work if you get carried away with trying to look at every little line item down to zero. But if you're strategic about it, and pick some of the key drivers, and look at those in great detail and just ask, why are we doing this? Is there another way to do it? Are there, what have our assumptions been, and can we consider changing our assumptions? That's the methodology. So you don't take anything for granted.
Yeah, and that you're looking, okay, if you have a new need, is this old thing that we're doing as important
Right.
as this new thing that we think
Exactly.
we need? Maybe the way you fund the new thing. I mean, to answer a lot of your questions, Amy, I would say I'm not committed to any of those things. Am I committed to funding every new position that you want? Absolutely not. Of course, I won't be here, but would I be? No. I mean, you have to look at the position and what it's needed for and what it's compared to what. I found a lot of these questions were too broad to be able to say, oh yes, I'm committed to funding fixed costs. Well, no, not if they're no longer needed. So I'm sure that's not helpful for you, but I think there's not enough specificity in those questions.
Let me mention one other thing. There are some new budget preparation methodologies out there that have gained usage in recent years that I'm not personally very familiar with. But essentially they're budgeting methodologies that are very disciplined in the sense that they require a thoughtful process to rank programs and activities.
Oh my gosh.
This is at the top, this is in the middle, this is at the bottom.
Yep.
And again, apropos your discussion of new initiatives, maybe there's some new initiatives that are more important to the community than some lower priority existing things.
Yeah.
Whether or not we have the capability to use one of those new methodologies this coming year, I don't know, but we can certainly do some research on communities that have adopted these newer methodologies and see if at least some of it may make sense
And just
going forward.
ranking of any sort would be an improvement.
Yeah, the priorities, or having priorities,
Yeah,
is great. It makes our job
much easier.
easier, or at least it allows us to align whatever initiatives we're taking as a board with the views of the other policy boards. So that part is great. But I guess to amplify what I said already, a slightly different question, is I regard the possibility of our having three more consecutive years of 5% tax increases to be a real crisis, that ultimately this is something that will change the character of the town over time. And so I want to really address it. This town does a great job of delivering what's most important. It's everyone feels completely safe. Everyone has beautiful spaces to walk in. People contribute to the town in a number of different ways, and it's a quiet, rural environment that has a lot of resources that most places don't have. I don't, as a member of the Board of Finance, take credit for the fact that the town is doing that. I think that's what the programs we've looked at have accomplished. And the question is whether we can deliver the broad ideas of what we want in terms of daily life without necessarily replicating all the programs we've now got or the amenities we're now doing. It there are other ways of achieving that.
Yeah.
And that's what I really would like to investigate, especially to the extent we have a little bit of breathing room before we're in the midst of the budget process.
A simple way to think of it is, what are the must-dos? What are the things we want to do if we have resources? What are the things that are nice to do,
Exactly.
you know?
Sounds like a
But if we don't
quote.
have the money, we stop doing them. You know, a hard thing to do, but that's kind of the broad way of looking at that concept.
Or could we
of
do them
ranking.
differently? Is-
If I could just offer a thought, I mean, noting Bert's extrapolation in the future years, if it is at that level, we have a serious problem, which will help define what kind of a town this is, and those are basic decisions. But I'm glad, Mr. Erdman, you mentioned the Carter years and the start of that, because in the early progress of zero-based budgeting, a lot of the progress was made by asking, what do we want to accomplish, not what structure we use. And the savings were made by finding out that computers and programs and different skills could do things efficiently, meaning human resources adjustment. And I'm sure you're quite familiar with that. And if you are to do this, and I strongly encourage you do, you need two things. One is the backing from Education, Selectmen, and Board of Finance for some of those human resources changes that will come, because to save money is changing the roles of employees, and often that's resisted just because we've never done it that way, or I'm not sure what you're expecting of me, or I'm not comfortable with the change. But also it takes human resources planning. That I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but if you start zero-based budgeting, human resources has to prepare employees to know that we're doing this, that we are looking out for our employees, but that they may not have the same job as currently defined. It may involve using new technology. It may be collaborating with other people, the net result of which will be to produce the end result we're looking for, but at a lower cost. So I find a lot of what's being discussed here tonight quite refreshing, frankly. And I'm sure this board will support your looking into that and the human resource adjustments that need to be made. I just urge you to seek that same kind of backing from the other boards, but also to have a human resources preparation such that this is not threatening, that the reason for it is understood, and that the need of cooperation in finding new solutions is part of the management of the town. So well, enough said, but I mean, you can't just do it. You have to prepare it and manage it.
And realistically, it's a multi-year process.
Yeah.
You know, you can't do it all in 1 year. And that's what I've encouraged Amy and Melissa to think in terms of as well. In terms of improvements to our budget process and budget preparation, you know, maybe we think in terms of a multi-year improvement process.
Thank you.
Mike, I wanted to give Mike a chance to chime in.
Lee, are you sure you only have 6 months? Can we hang on to you for, maybe a couple of years so you can help us get some of this fun stuff done?
Thanks for that,
Unfortunately, my expiration date is December 22nd.
Oh, man. Well, whatever we can do to help you, work your magic, I'm happy to lend a hand any way I can, for sure.
Great.
I'm not going to waste a lot of air. A lot of great stuff has been said. And as far as improvements, I'm going to chew on. I like what Amy started, and to Linda's point, I think it just needs a little bit of refining, and that's kind of where I'm going to focus my efforts for our next meeting, and I'll send my suggestions to Amy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Lee, did you want to respond, or?
I'm just going to throw out one other concept.
Sure.
That probably many of you are familiar with, and that is lean government.
Oh, yes.
Lean government's
Lean
a
process.
wonderful concept. It's much harder to implement in the public sector than it is in the private sector. And I've been involved in it in a variety of ways over the years. I'm not an expert in it, but I understand the general concepts. And one of the principles of lean government is that there are a lot of processes that we do in government because it's always been done that way. And if you really take a close look at all the steps involved in a particular process across multiple processes, you find out there's a lot of steps that can be cut out, that you don't have to put the effort in that you do. And that oftentimes leads to the opportunity to redirect your human resources.
Right.
And many organizations that have committed to going through this process have made the commitment upfront to employees that nobody's going to lose their job as a result of this process we're going through. But you may end up changing we may end up changing your job description, et cetera, et cetera. And we may end up redirecting functions, et cetera. And the organizations that have done this the best over the years, and there's many examples of local governments and state governments that have really done this really well. They've involved the employees in the process because the employees, they know best
What the steps
right?
are.
What the steps are and what steps can be cut out. So something to think about for the long term for this organization about, should there be an initiative at some point, some sort of lean government initiative.
That's a great idea.
We're not going to have the capacity to do that in the short term, but longer term, something to think about.
Excellent. So I'll just, a quick overview, a couple things, Amy, for July, and I just wanted to get everyone's input. Are we good with our policies? Debt service targeted 7, not to exceed 8. Reserves 15 to 17%. We're at 15.5. Retirement investment assumption at 6.5. Health reserves at 20 to 25%, and the tax collection assumption rate at 98.5. And we had expressed during the process the desire to stay at or below the municipal cap. Are those still
Yep.
top priorities for this board? Are there any we want to reevaluate at this point?
I'm on board with them.
Yep.
Is there any you would like us to evaluate or reconsider? Okay, so why don't you use that for our model building then?
Okay, so just so I'm clear, we're gonna use the section where it says top fiscal policies, essentially maintaining what we have, taking into account Bert's consideration, go through and do a more finite, detailed of the assumptions instead of just using generic percentages. And then to Linda's point, not adding anything in, just doing a baseline with obviously the updated, refined projections for the upcoming fiscal year. Is that accurate?
Madam Chair, I would add one thing if I could.
Sure.
One of the things we talked about in our, I thought, very productive meeting was we should do a better job in fine-tuning both our revenues and expenditures so we don't end up the fiscal year with as big a operating surplus as we have in recent years. It's a wonderful thing to have, but is it really necessary?
Right.
So in that regard, one of the things I would encourage the board to consider is perhaps over time, incrementally, increasing the property tax collection rate that we budget. You know, it's a wonderful conservative approach to budget 98.5%, knowing you have an experience of collecting on average 99.5%. That's a wonderful cushion. But particularly given the forecast over the next several years, might the board be open to considering increasing that a little bit? And we can certainly give you some options and alternatives, impacts of various levels for your consideration. But that'd be one way to tighten up things on the revenue side.
So one point to that, we had an experience this year where our motor vehicle supplementals came in quite a bit lower than we thought, and had we not had this, we would have been under revenue in terms of that. So that's sort of why we have, policy-wise, I understand what you're saying, but couldn't we also accomplish the same thing by budgeting more accurately in revenue, in terms of operating and revenue? All three.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah.
So
And I just to amplify that, I do think that cushion, gives us an automatic way to sort of pre-fund some capital the following year, or if we need to increase, which we have in years past, the reserves to
Yes.
meet what the
Yeah,
bonding
understood.
agencies want. It was a way to do that, so it actually had a purpose. But I do hear your point about, there's a fine line between budgeting conservatively and budgeting so that you create this nice little slush fund that you have at the end of the year that you get to, hey, look, we have all this money, let's go spend it. And I don't like the latter. So it's finding that fine line.
Right.
We've been through that, like with vacancies. We didn't used to budget for vacancies. We just assumed that all positions were filled. Well, that was a crazy assumption. Of course, but positions are. So that just created this extra pool at the end of the year. So
Exactly.
I'd be more inclined to be looking at some of those things where we've ended up year after year with surpluses and get rid of those, but continue to have the revenue assumption where it is, because we have specific uses for that.
one of the things I think that would be really helpful, Lee, if you could guide us, as opposed to thinking more globally, what is an acceptable amount to have at year-end close? If you look at the totality of revenue, excess, and budgetary savings, should it be 1%, 1.5%, 2%, 3%? The legislature sort of cuts it off at 3%, so we're not going above 3%. But where is that sweet spot?
Yeah, I'll certainly give some thought about that and talk with staff about that, and we'll come back with some thoughts.
That would be really helpful.
So I need to apologize. I screwed up on my calendar, and I have another commitment at 7. I have to leave, so my apologies. I don't usually do this.
We still have
I never do this.
No,
But,
you never do, but we still have a quorum, so thank you.
okay.
In terms of the document that I gave you, there are a few things in it, and I'll just highlight them quickly because we'll go through them at some point. What data should the Board of Finance evaluate in recommending a reasonable inflationary increase in taxes? Because what we put to the citizens has to be, I guess, there needs to be a foundation behind it, a reason. So what are we thinking about in terms of inflationary increases as to what's reasonable to ask our taxpayers to pay? Partly, what data should the Board of Finance consider in evaluating citizen affordability and willingness to pay? And I know Lee had some thoughts on that. Confirm which towns we should compare with for economic competitiveness and what factors to evaluate. We can't keep going high if our neighbors are going low, because at some point that will make us have to give tons of abatements just to attract businesses. So that's part of the thing we evaluate. determine our goals for next year, and I put a copy of our previous goals and some potential ones
Is that a
down.
joke?
What?
Abatements, increase abatements to do it? I think
I'm dead serious. If you become economically less competitive, the only way to get businesses to come to your town is you have to give abatements because you have no other choice. Your taxes are so high. Why would they come to us when they could go to another place with a lower mill
I get
rate?
the logic, I just don't think it would work, but okay.
So,
there's also the problem of competitiveness in the residential market.
All
because
that,
Yeah,
yes,
the high
absolutely.
taxes are going to be reducing property values and reducing the
Right.
grand list and creating that death spiral that Art has described in
Yes.
previous meetings.
So our board does take a look at economic competitiveness with our comparative towns, just to make sure we're in line and not an outlier, one way or the other. You had mentioned priority needs, and how do you prioritize? How does our board? Our board has pretty much said if you come in guidance, our scrutiny is very much lower. If we need to reduce the taxes, then we go in the typical criteria. Rating, is it a mandate, health and safety, and they're all listed in here. But if you have other things you think we should think about, I thank you for your looking into what year-end contribution, year-end close, what percentage is a reasonable amount. You know, obviously you don't want to come in at minus 5%. Right? Planning for financial stress and reduced grand lists. I think you've given a great outline of what we should do, zero-based budgeting and how to approach that, and some few things that I think we actually have zero-based budgeting in here. Our board has discussed that in the past. Efficiency evaluations, you know, emphasize Linda's point on the assessor audit and thank Amy and Francine for beginning that. One thing that other neighbors have done is they've started to evaluate motor vehicle registration, and are we capturing all the registration, especially in apartments? And then sort of what indicators and comparisons we look at, and that's essentially it. And then the very end is sort of a time frame for when we evaluate what. And over the summer, Lee, I know you haven't been with us, but we do a policy review, which Amy is giving us the preview tonight, and then we'll do the review next month, and we agree on the assumptions we're going to use in the budget, the tax collection assumption rate, reserve level, and all that over the summer. In December, we can take our first look at the CPI and COLA because those numbers come out in December. And by that point, we should be able to calculate the Connecticut municipal cap and see where those are and can do an initial evaluation. Okay, if revenues are flat, what might be an acceptable inflationary increase based on the data? And then in January, we get fixed costs from Amy. And to Bert's point, thank you for this. Lee, doing an in-depth evaluation is what are fixed costs and what should we, are they actually fixed costs? And we believe that's really a management question, and we look to your guidance for that. But that second evaluation can be, okay, we know what the inflationary increase would be acceptable to our residents. What if our fixed costs are above it? Or what if our fixed costs are below? And then you get to February, you go, okay, inflationary is here, fixed costs are here. We have grand list growth. Are we going to do that for tax relief? Or is that going to help pay for some of the fixed costs? And so we can then start doing a multi-tiered evaluation based on data. And obviously it involves some judgment. That's where not everyone agrees. But at least it gives us jumping off points with which to do it. With the information we have at the time that the information becomes available. But Lee, anything you can do to help us come up with a methodology that makes sense within a timeline, given the information that's available to the boards when we have to have conversations, that would be helpful. And then at the end, I just put together where we ended up on mill rates, and you can see Simsbury is actually on the kind of very high end. Granby is higher. The others are the ones that are higher right now will be going through reval next year, and they'll come down substantially. So we'll have a better idea of where we are, but that's something we're monitoring. And Lee, to the extent you can give us suggestions on what other towns are appropriate benchmarking towns, we would welcome that. But those are some of the initial things. And again, Amy's modeling is so helpful. I think to Bert's point, if we can get a tighter look at what's coming, we'll have an idea of what we need to do. If the grand list projections suddenly come roaring in, we're having a different conversation than if they're negative. One of the things we had asked for when we get to the budgetary, the capital discussion is, can we get just a summary of where we are with our capital projects today? One of the things we've noted over time is that we'll approve a capital project and sometimes it can take 7 years to complete. So that makes us question, did we need to approve it at that point in time? Could we have reallocated our approval date to better affect resources or free up resources? So just a quick look at where we are. And then Amy does this with Francine already, but just a summary of economic development coming down the road narratively that will help us understand what grand list projections are. I saw in the POCD they're recommending, very thrilled, I'm not sure anyone was here when Rob and I recommended a fiscal impact analysis tool and initiative be done for new development, so we can really understand not just, yay, we're getting grand list money, but oh my gosh, there are these service needs that are going to come with it, so the net cost to the town would be very helpful. And obviously Amy can play a great role in that analysis. But if we got her a tool, she wouldn't have to work that hard. So, I mean, I think she's crucial in economic development, tying economic development and financial planning. It just, to me, makes tremendous sense so that we can understand where we're going. So that's big thoughts on that. A lot to do. I think it's wonderful, Amy, that you have brought this up, because we haven't really had an opportunity to pause and think about things and say, this is what I care about, this is what we want to think about, this is what we should think about when we think about stuff. And so I think this is a great initiative, and thank you for bringing it to the board. And looking forward to some interesting discussions. So I think Bert is right, we're at a crossroads. Are we going to be a community where you come here, you send your kids to school, and then you can't afford to live here when you retire and you move out? Or are we going to be a whole life? And I don't know that we as a community have made that collective decision yet, but, all right, so we'll start then with the assumptions as they are. We'll be open to your conversations about that, but you can hear there's probably,
It's going to be a hard sell.
yeah. I'm not trying to devote a lot of your time to that. But we'll consider it. But certainly about how much we should have in savings at year end. What's an appropriate amount? Because it shouldn't be zero. And we do want to fund capital and, you know, the free cash approach that Massachusetts use. They have too much free cash, but they don't have as many reserves as we do. All right, so moving on to policy planning, if we're ready.
Yeah.
Mike, was there anything you wanted to add before we move on?
I have nothing to add, Madam Chair.
Okay. In terms of policy planning, each summer we review Board of Finance policies for any needed updates or to add new ones. We try to do policy reviews for each policy at least every 5 years, and I'm happy to report it looks like we're finally caught up. Is that right, Amy? So congratulations to all the members of the board and Amy for that. We had talked during in December about whether we wanted to do a capital reserves fund balance and a Simsbury Farms fund balance policies. I know Glastonbury has their capital reserves. I think it's like they always want to have $1 million in their capital reserve fund. Simsbury Farms fund balance, it's sort of an enterprise organization. It's a fee for service. How much should they have in their fund balance? What's an appropriate level that we want to target for them? When do they have too much, and should we divert it towards capital for the Simsbury Farm? So is that still something folks are interested in doing? Yeah. Amy, you had expressed a willingness to take a stab at what those should be. Okay. So we'll do that do you want to do it July or August, first read?
If we could do August, that would be
Yeah.
helpful. That way we can focus on the
Perfect.
preparing the budget modeling for July.
Okay, so we'll do that. Hopefully those should be just 2 paragraphs. I don't think that will be a hard policy paper to do. In terms of, and there are, for members of the public, there actually are benchmarks on these type of things, so we can look at those. During the budgetary process in February, the board members had expressed some interest in going back and relooking at the emergency supplemental appropriation process. I did go back and I realized that we had actually already made that change and we just incorporated the language of the charter. So I don't think we need to do anything there, but I wanted to see if anyone was still interested in relooking at that policy. No, got a big no there. All right, great. Year-end spending. Lee, when I had met with Lee, he had asked the board's sentiment on how we approach year-end spending, and I told him that, you know, our general practice at that time, but I want to confirm it with this board, is generally we don't spend. What we do is we put it in capital reserves, and you spend it in next year's budget when you can consider everything as a comprehensive whole instead of doing a one-off consideration. The minor exceptions to that is if there's an urgent capital need that wasn't anticipated and rejected during the budget that can't be put off, or if we feel we need to contribute to other reserves like health or pension or some other need. But other than that, our preference has been in the past to do it in consideration with the budget so that the citizens have an opportunity to weigh in on that. But I don't know if I got that right, so I'm going to open it up to board members and see if I captured what has been expressed in the past. All right.
I would say you had.
What did you say?
I'd say that captures what was expressed in the back.
I'm not a maven on this, but it seems to me that you did, yes.
Mike?
I concur. That's what I had.
So that's kind of where we are.
I got the message.
You don't want any barns falling down at the end of the year.
Yeah, what we'd like to avoid is, it didn't make it in the budget because I was trying to keep my budget down, but hooray, we have it now. And our answer is, hooray, you have it now. Let it compete in the next year's budget. That's great. Especially given the looming situation we have. We know all resources are going to need to be directed. What we did this past year, I'm sure Amy told you, is part of the way we got it from a 6 to almost a 5 tax increase was we paid cash for capital and reduced the debt service costs and reduced long-term costs over the decade. That all tools may need to be available again. Does that answer your question? Is there anything you'd like to ask us to consider?
No.
Okay. I think that's it on that. Amy, you're comfortable with what we're looking at these days at this point? Mm-hmm. Anything else? Oh, the one thing Amy and I talked about to add to that is the transfer policy. We'll relook at that with Bert. Who will draft it, right? So we'll have that. So those are the only policy reviews. And then in terms of the minutes, have folks had an opportunity to review the minutes?
We have.
And are there any changes or recommendations at this point?
I just got one small one. They're very well done. Under budget discussion, there's a line here, Ms. Evans has to make sure they were in compliance with the attorney letter, et cetera. Municipal cabinet recommend they don't know at this stage what inflation rate they will apply. Ms. Merriweather said she would reach out to Martin at the state. And I can't see any other reference to Martin.
Martin Heft.
Yeah, Martin Heft.
We can add Heft.
Okay. And is there a department? I mean,
Yes.
I just Martin at state. I mean, there are about 50,000 employees. I had no idea.
Well, if you're in the finance department, there's only one
There's
Martin.
only one, Mark. Fine, fine. I just,
No,
just
it's-
add the name. I just,
In office, please, Amy.
and I second them.
If
Did you
you-
move to approve?
I haven't yet, but subject to your amendment, I now move to approve.
And I second your offer. All right.
Are there any other changes? May I have a motion to approve the amendment, subject to our recommended changes?
Didn't I just do that?
Oh, you did. You did. All in favor of voting
Aye.
for? Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
I work with a Martin at the state. If you lose one, I've got another.
We have a spare.
Glad to know there's plenty.
Is there anything else for the good of the order?
Yeah, I just, if I could.
Sure.
Mr. Erdman, when I offered my comments, I was basing them on the lean experience. which I'd been through and I didn't know you had been through. I was lean trained under the Malloy administration, and I'm enthusiastic to hear that you know about it. Let me just say that I totally agree with you that number one, it doesn't get done all at once. You start small, you include employees, and you assure them they're not going to lose their job. It would be a terrific part of what promises to be a fine legacy if we could start that process. One department, say, if we could hire a lean trainer, that's not something you do, but bring in a lean trainer, take just one department and start the process. And the net effect, when it started the state government, what people saw was they have better jobs, more modern jobs, more meaningful jobs, more productive jobs, more secure jobs, and they've saved some money. And it started a desire to change from being apprehensive and afraid of this process to wanting to join it, to be one of the next departments to do it. And if we could start very small here, you've got plenty on your plate, but to get a lean instructor in, pick a department, get rid of the anxiety that comes from there is going to be change, to have buy-in, to have people who've done it then usually become proud of it, and they become the biggest advocates for the process. If that could begin, it would be a terrific legacy as part of what you're already offering the town of Simsbury.
Certainly take a look at that possibility. Do you know any lean experts in town who might be willing to donate their time so we don't have to hire someone to do this?
I wish I could say no. When I was the new chairman of the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, I was required to go to lean training.
There you go.
And knew nothing about it and learned about it and became an advocate. And I haven't had anything to do with it since, so I'm sorry, I don't know of such a name. I'm just leading with a, this has great possibilities given what we're looking at over the next few years. And if you could at least plant that seed, it would be true.
I will certainly follow up with that. I worked in 3 different municipalities with an outstanding lean trainer. I don't know if this particular individual is still in business or if he's retired. But I will see who's out there and ask around and see if we can come up with a modest cost way to begin that process here in the town of Simsbury.
Let me just add that obviously, it's an obvious point, but that it'd be useful if the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education were to learn what this is. And so that there's not anxiety about what we're doing here.
Agreed.
Yes, that was my additional thought for the good of the order.
So I just open it up, and we talked about year-end savings. Is this one of the exceptions? Because it's a spend to save initiative.
Yep.
That might be acceptable to the board.
What it would be.
Hesitant generally, no, but if for spend to save for next year's budget, perhaps.
And for years after that.
Right. So that's one thing to think about there. So as you can see, we're kind of flexible. We're kind of not, and sometimes we're flexible. All right. With that, anything else from anyone?
I got nothing.
Okay. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Mike, you want to second that?
I'll second that.
All in favor? Please say aye. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.